Hey closers, Maxwell here with Helpmeclose.com. In addition to this beautiful sunshine, got something I want to share with you. I just got off the phone with one of my mentors, Jeb Blount. Not only is Jeb the CEO of Sales Gravy, but he has written several best-selling books. One of those being Fanatical Prospecting, which is a must-read by anybody in the sales community. Jeb has also recently released his newest book, Sales EQ, where he talks about the importance of emotional intelligence when making a sale. Wanting to learn more about emotional intelligence, I dive deep with Jeb to figure out how it applies to us in sales, not only in closing sales, but in our work life and finding a new job. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jeb Blount. Hey Jeb, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Max. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm just really excited to look more into sales IQ and dive into that. And to start off, I wanted to ask you, what is sales EQ? What does that mean?
Sales EQ is sales-specific emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, just the basic its definition, is your ability to manage and control your own emotions while at the same time being able to perceive and respond appropriately to the emotions of other people. That is emotional intelligence in a nutshell. Sales EQ is sales-specific emotional intelligence. So I believe that emotional intelligence changes, like the different skills that you need, the different talent that you need, the different way that you respond changes, whether you're a parent and you're a parent and I'm a parent, whether you're a policeman or a fireman or a teacher or a leader or someone's peer or in selling. And in sales, emotional intelligence is specific because we have in sales that we have a commercial relationship that's basically an artificial relationship, and it's got a timeline on it. So we typically meet with a customer, we have a conversation with them, we both are looking for an outcome, we both don't trust each other because we both want to protect ourselves and get the outcome we want, and when that's over, the relationship changes. Now it may change into an account management type role, which is a little bit different, but there's this space and time when it's over. We either close the deal or we don't close the deal. And because of that, in sales, we have something called dual process, which is different than, say, being a leader or being a parent. Dual process says that I have to have empathy, which is a meta skill of the 21st century and a core piece of sales-specific emotional intelligence or sales EQ. I have to be empathetic, but I also have to be outcome-driven. And that's different than just about any other relationship that you have. And in almost every relationship, we say, as much empathy as possible is good. But in sales, too much empathy can get you in trouble because the relationship can get in the way of the actual sales call, right? So it can get in the way of closing the deal. So I have to be able to balance both of those things. I have to be able to have empathy and build relationships and get to know my buyers, understand my buyers, and at the same time understand why I'm there. The reason I'm here is I need to move to the next step in the sales process. I need to ask for the business. I need to get more time. I need to get data, whatever the case may be. And that's what makes it unique and different, and why I wrote an entire book about the subject.
Absolutely. So can you give me a specific example of where, a salesperson not having the highest sales EQ ends up turning around and biting them in the rear end?
Well, yeah, a great example of that is what salespeople do every day. So when I work with my clients and I'm as a consultant and I walk into sales teams that are having trouble, or I look at pipelines that are having trouble, there's two things that you'll always find. One is they're not doing enough prospecting, so there's not enough stuff being put into the pipe, which causes big problems. And then the other is they're not moving the deals that are in the pipe, so the pipeline is stalled. And you probably have stalled deals in your pipeline right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I look at stalled deals, the number one reason why the deals are stalled is because the deals aren't moving to the next step. Right? That can happen for a couple of reasons. One, you could be working on a low probability deal. You could be working on a deal that was never supposed to be in your pipeline in the first place. So you didn't do a very good job of qualifying it. But assuming that you did a good job of qualifying it, is not moving to the next step because the salesperson is not asking for micro commitments. That requires emotional intelligence. The emotional intelligence of understanding where I stand in the process, of being empathetic with my prospect, and at the same time, asking them and testing their engagement. I'm asking for the next step. I'm asking them to match my effort. Salespeople, in a lot of cases, are reticent to do that because they feel like asking the prospect for the next meeting or the next step or the thing that they want is they're being too pushy. That is where empathy gets in the way of outcome. At the same time, if you're not doing enough prospecting and you have a stalled pipeline or an empty pipeline, you get desperate, right?
Yeah.
And as salespeople, your disruptive emotions of fear, insecurity, desperation, impatience, your need to feel important, your need to feel appreciated or accepted, I mean, all those disruptive emotions get in the way because they don't allow you to control the process. So if you're not prospecting enough, immediately you don't feel as confident. Well, emotions are contagious. And if you don't feel confident, you feel weak and desperate, you're transferring that emotion to your prospect. And prospects don't buy from salespeople who aren't confident, right? So in these are really specific examples of that. And all throughout the book, we talk about where, whether you're asking questions or you're coming off as not likable, how your disruptive emotions are constantly getting in the way and causing you problems.
Absolutely. So I think especially this is really important for if you're a new account executive or if you're new to sales or in a new company. How can, if you're in that position where you're new, how can you up your emotional or your sales EQ in this instance to where, you're battling that? Because when you're new, you're going to have a lot of pressure. You need to close these deals. So it's really hard to balance that emotion. What can we do?
And along with that, you're new and you feel insecure because you don't feel like you have enough product knowledge. You don't know how to answer all the questions. You probably say to your boss all the time, what do I say if they do this? So you're in that situation. So, and that's not gonna, you can't change that circumstance. When you're new, you're new. When you feel insecure, you feel insecure. What you have to do is recognize the impact that it has on your prospect. And so what we teach in the book are the frameworks that you need. And I'll give you an example. If I'm new and I'm working with a prospect, what I want to do is I want to be able to judge what is the probability this prospect is going to continue down the road with me. And when I'm new, sometimes I work on prospects that are not very qualified because maybe I just don't know what qualified looks like. Maybe they said you need to have these technical things, but I don't understand the nuance of, yeah, they have all these things, but do they fit? Or is the stakeholder, the person that I'm dealing with, willing to deal with me? So one thing I teach new salespeople is really simple thing. At the end of every call, ask for the next step. Always ask for the next step. If they're unwilling to give you the next step, you're getting a pretty good clue that they're not that into you. And in places like I'm in Georgia, sometimes people in Georgia don't want to tell you that they don't want to work with you anymore. They don't like the conflict. So you have to test that. The other is be aware of what's happening with the prospect. New salespeople have a tendency to be delusional. Like they're desperate for anything, so they'll work on anything. And what they have a tendency to do is they tend to focus on the things that confirm what they believe. That's called confirmation bias. So they believe this is a viable prospect because, hey, I got to work on something. So they look for anything the prospect is doing that confirm that belief, even though those aren't true, versus looking for and paying attention to, is this prospect leaning forward when you're having a conversation with them? Are they giving you eye contact? When you ask them questions, do they respond? So it's helping the salesperson paying attention to those things and then testing that with engagement. The second thing I tell a new salesperson is go spend time with the people that have been doing it for a while and ask them to teach you what qualified looks like. Because the biggest problem you have as a new salesperson is you end up working on stuff that's never going to close. You did this, I did this, we've all done it. We do it because we got nothing else. So it's better to get some advice on what's actually going to be viable for you, because the thing that you'll learn in the book, and you learn this through your career, is that the way ultra high performers, these are the top tier salespeople, the way they play the game of sales is through win probability. And they're always shaping win probability and bending win probability in their favor. And what that means is that they don't spend their time working on deals that don't have a high probability of closing. Okay. You'll never know that a deal has a 100% chance of closing until it closed. You'll never know a deal was a 0% chance of not closing until it didn't close. You don't know those things, but there are clues that tell you that it has a higher probability, and all you're doing throughout the process is shaping that. That begins with working on the best deals, right? That begins in making sure that you feel confident because you got a full pipeline. That starts with qualifying up front and continuing to qualify all the way through. And one of the things that I had a great sales manager I worked for when I was young and first starting out and was really insecure. He did something called murder boarding, and anybody can do this. And what murder boarding is it was great for a young salesperson, really embarrassing at first because you like everything about that you don't like, everything about the deal that you don't know gets exposed. But what we would do is we would sit down, usually with a group of people aboard, right? We would have and we would have a big whiteboard in front of us, and we would figure out every way to kill our deal. So we would say, so tell us all the reasons why they're going to say no. What are the 3 people in the deal that we don't know about that are going to come back at the last minute and kill it? Let's talk about what our competitor has that we don't have. And instead of like talking about all the ways we're going to win it, we would talk about all the ways we were going to lose it. And as a new salesperson, if you take your deals and you just go through that process, it helps you become emotionally aware, right? And also helps you become rationally aware of what you don't know. So you get out of that emotional attachment that salespeople often have, and you start thinking more rationally about the deal. And the one thing I tell young salespeople is the person that has the most emotional control is the one that's most likely to get the outcome that they desire at the deal, whether it's you or your prospect. So you want to use these mechanisms to help you gain that awareness. And another way of looking at it is it's really difficult in sales to be delusional and successful at the same time. Yeah. So I want to use everything I possibly can that helps me gain awareness in the middle of the emotional stew that we all feel when we're selling. Those emotions are happening without our consent, and they are going to continue to happen. And awareness allows you to rise above the emotions. You can feel them, you can see them, but you're not being carried away by them. And as a new salesperson, that's like the most important thing that you can do, because the feeling of insecurity because you don't know everything is going to be there, and it may be true. And in fact, it's probably better that you feel a little bit insecure than overconfident, because at least you know what you don't know.
Exactly. And that insecurity can sometimes light that fire and get you to get out there. So what I'm hearing is if you're in a new sales position, or if you're feeling that, your sales EQ is down a little bit, the cure to that is getting out there, hustling, getting more prospects, but not just more prospects, but ones who are qualified.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're new, you want to build your confidence. The best way to build your confidence is to sell stuff, right? The other best way to build your confidence is to have a lot of stuff that you're working on. So you're not like holding on to one deal at a time.
Yeah. So Jeb, I'm going to throw you on the spot a little bit here. I want you to, if you can, think of maybe a deal in your younger days that didn't go so well because your sales EQ, and share that. And then also I want to hear how you would do that differently now with having your sales EQ up.
Absolutely. I can remember every deal I ever lost. And one of the most embarrassing ones, when I first started working for a company called Aramark, and I sold a really sexy product. I sold industrial uniforms. Made a lot of money doing it, but it was, wasn't like software or anything like that. But from a commission standpoint, good stuff. And I'm working on this deal in Anderson, South Carolina. And it's a small company. They got 25, 30 people that are putting in a uniform. And I had, I'd worked with this guy and I'd met with him, and I really thought that I had the deal. In fact, I told my sales manager, I'm going to a closing call, put on my closing tie, I go out there and I walk through the door, and he looks at me and says, he goes, I've decided to do business with your competitor, a company called G&K. And I was like, what? I mean, you could have just like kicked me in the stomach, because I thought I had this deal wrapped up. And I told people I put on my forecast and we had this deal. I said, well, why in the world would you go do business with them? I'm way, way better than those guys are. And he goes, well, we just like their shirt so much better than yours. And I went, you like their shirt better? He goes, yeah. I said, can I see it? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, I'll get your sample while I was out there. So he brings my shirt out that I'd left him, right, a sample, and he brings their shirt out, and he starts telling me all about their shirt. He goes, yeah, it's got the double placket, and it's got this, and the yoke in the back, and blah, 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 blah. And he goes, and the best thing about it, I want you to see the pocket. The pocket is double stitched right here. It's rounded so that our pins don't go through when my guys are out there. And I'm like, oh my God, well, I mean, I couldn't believe what was happening. It was crazy. And I looked at him and I grabbed my shirt and I said, this shirt does the same thing. And I said, look, they're made by the same manufacturer. It's the same shirt. But it was too late. I lost the deal. Like he was emotionally attached to the G&K rep. What did the G&K rep do? What I did is I went in and I talked. I talk because talking as a salesperson makes me feel important, the most insatiable human need. I didn't take time to really, really listen to him, to learn his language, to understand what was important to him. I didn't build a relationship. I transacted. I just went in. I followed my sales process. Bam, 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 bam. What the G&K rep did was ask deep questions and found out that this guy, the owner of the company, hates it when he sees his guys come in from delivering things with pin marks all on their shirt. And they had pins because this was a little bit before, I'm not a dinosaur, but it was before everybody was on their devices. So they were like writing down orders and things like that. And as a business owner, there was just something about that drove him crazy. Well, I never asked the question, and I never went out and learned about it. I never understood that. So the G&K rep didn't have to spend time doing anything else. All the G&K rep had to do was say, what's important to you? They spoke his language. Language is huge for human beings. In fact, if you go back and look at social biologists, they'll tell you that we develop language as human beings so that we can sell stuff to each other. And instead of speaking, the G&K rep, my language, I was speaking the uniforms. The G&K rep was speaking image, how they look, specifically how the pins aren't going to clip through the pockets and write on the shirts. And the guy bought it. He bought it. And that's the lesson I learned. And I've learned this lesson over and over again. And that is like core to sales EQ is this: buyers buy things for their reasons, not yours. And the problem we have as salespeople is our disruptive emotions get in the way of us taking time to understand why those buyers buy and learning the buyer's language so that when we present our solutions, the things that we offer, we do so in the buyer's language rather than ours, right? And we're connecting the dots or bridging between our solution and the buyer's solution, the buyer's need or want or desire or opportunity in a way that connects with why the buyer would buy. And you can't do that, right, if you don't have the emotional intelligence to control your disruptive need to talk, right? Your impulse control, your impatience. You're, for example, sitting in a conversation with a customer and you ask them a question, or a prospect and you ask them a question, and as soon as they say something, you pounce on it and start pitching. Happens all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sitting back and having the patience to do that. Salespeople don't do that. Their insecurity, their need to feel accepted. They just talk too much. They're not likable. There's so many influence frameworks that salespeople miss because of their own disruptive emotions. And the G&K rep in that case absolutely whooped me. I mean, they just kicked my rear end. I got beat. I walked out of there. My head was down. I was so embarrassed. I had to go back and tell everybody I didn't get the deal. More than anything, I was embarrassed for myself because I was better than that, right? I was a better salesperson than that. And I got overconfident and I allowed myself to get in the way of the deal, and no one owned that but me. And I swore I would never let that happen to me again. And it's one of the reasons, 20 years later, that I wrote this book and that I became a student of why do people buy, right? And how do we get them to buy? And what do we do as salespeople that get in the way of that?
What a great lesson. That's huge. So thank you for sharing that. I want to shift gears here, okay? And I want to ask you another question because a large part of my audience is they're just getting out of college. They're young guys or they're new to their career. So they're maybe going from an SDR role to an account executive role or making some kind of shift, and they're looking for a new job. How does sales EQ play a role for a salesperson who is, looking for a new role in sales and going through that interview process?
The most important thing that you can do if you want to use sales EQ in the interview process is ask great questions that get the interviewer talking. So I'll walk you through a basic framework. So the most insatiable human need, in fact, the singularity of all human behavior, at least in the first world, is our need for significance. Every human being has this core need to feel like we matter, like we're accepted. And the easiest way to make another person feel important or appreciated is to just listen to them. So in an interview, when you're interviewing, what you want to do is you want to create our walk through the door with good open-ended questions that provoke the person to talk. And an open-ended question isn't, tell me about the benefits here, or how soon do I get promoted? They're a question for the interview. What caused you to come work for this company? What are your biggest challenges? What are the things that you believe it takes to be successful here? Give me an idea of your ideal representative. And then you shut up. You shut up and you stay out of the way and you let them talk. And the reason that you do that is something called the self-disclosure loop. And by the way, the people that are salespeople, if you listen to this, your whole job in a sales call is to activate the self-disclosure loop. The self-disclosure loop is a really simple thing that happens inside of our brain. We like to brag. And all you got to do if you want to know we like to brag, go hang out on Facebook or Snapchat for a little while and you can see people bragging, right? We love to brag. And we like to talk about ourselves. And when people begin to talk, blood begins to rush to the pleasure centers of the brain, the same pleasure centers that drive all the things in our life that we really love to do, like eating like a really good meal, or being in love, or going and having a fun day with your kids. That gets activated when you begin talking about yourself. What happens is every time you reveal something, so as you begin talking about yourself and you reveal something, you get a dopamine hit to the pleasure centers of the brain. So I call it brain crack, right? You basically are getting brain crack. And as that happens, you want to talk more. And you can watch people do this. They'll start telling you things about themselves that they shouldn't be saying. They'll start giving you all this information, and they know consciously I shouldn't say these things, but they can't help it at the subconscious level because they're getting this dopamine hit. They've got brain crack. They're like their own drugs. And so what happens is the person will keep talking as long as you stay out of the way. I mean, as soon as you start talking, your ears turn off, and so does the other person, the prospect. Yeah. So you get the interviewer talking, and they start talking, and you just stay out of the way, and the dopamine thing hits. That loop begins, and it goes and goes, and they self-reveal. And all of a sudden, what they'll do is they'll start crossing the TMI zone. They'll start getting out of character as the interviewer, and they'll start telling you all this stuff. They'll tell you about the job, good and bad. They'll tell you what they were looking for, what's most important to them. They'll tell you all these things. They'll tell you about themselves, their insecurities. And then all you have to do is, at that moment that they do that, say, this is why you should hire me, because I will be able to do this for you. I can solve this problem for you. I can help you with this. So you begin bridging your pitch, hire me, which is your biggest sell at that moment, to their situation, their language. They teach you their language. So you start using their language. At the same time, because you're listening to them, you're making them feel important. That triggers something called obligation. That triggers the law of reciprocity. The law of reciprocity is always in play for human beings. I mean, you can imagine a world where if I did something nice for you, you wouldn't feel obligated to do something nice for me. I mean, our entire society would break down. So when we do something nice for someone, it triggers their desire for obligation. Now, it doesn't mean that they will do something for us. I mean, walking into any relationship with that quid pro quo sort of mindset, it's like premeditated resentment. But at the subconscious level, because the interviewer is sitting there and they're telling me their story, and I'm listening intently and I'm leaning forward and I'm showing them that I'm paying attention and I'm watching their emotions and I'm responding to that. When I'm doing that, that makes them feel really good. I'm giving them the greatest single gift I can give another human being, making them feel important. They feel an obligation to me, which means that the probability that they're going to move me to the next step in an interview process, or they are going to want to hire me, or they're going to give me a shot, goes up exponentially. And all I'm doing in an interview is doing what? I'm trying to improve and bend win probability in my favor and out of the favor of the other candidates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's how you use an emotional intelligence frame in that situation. I'm going to move my earphone up.
No worries.
Getting a little loose on me there.
Getting excited. So it sounds to me that sales EQ at the kind of most basic level is almost knowing how to get your prospect or whoever you're talking about to open up their mouth and talk, and then you knowing when to almost shut it up.
That's exactly right. So like at a core level, I mean, all sales is listening, right? So let's look, maybe another way of looking at it. If sales was a language, it would be a language of questions. Yeah. So if you listen, you win. And influence, by the way, is not about what you say. It's about what you hear. So it's I want to move into the prospect's familiarity bubble. I want to be more similar. The similarity bias is something really strong in human beings, and that is that we as human beings begin to believe that people and things that are more similar to them, people in particular, are better and more trustworthy. So, so if I'm your next door neighbor, you're probably more likely to buy from me than you're going to buy from a person who lives in Cleveland, sure, and 1,000 miles away. So in the course of a sales conversation, what I'm doing is I'm listening to you. As I listen to you, I trigger obligation. I make you feel good. I'm able to learn your language. You teach me your individual language, and language is so powerful, right? Yeah. Because what language does is allow me, whether or not I'm like, say you're 23 years old, a lot of times you're selling to people that are probably twice your age. Mm-hmm. So how can you be similar to them? I mean, you don't have the same experiences. You may be selling to people that come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, different sects. I mean, we're all over the place. People are different than each other. But language can connect us. Yeah. So if your prospect is saying, I really want my guys to look good, and I hate that ink on their shirts when they do that. All I got to do is talk about ink on their shirts. I was working for a client in the telecom industry. I never sold cell phones before, but I was trying to show them that we could change the way and accelerate how fast people could sell phones, and they didn't believe me. So I said, give me a logoed shirt. I'm going to go work in one of your stores for a week. At the end of the week, I was the number one salesperson in the entire system. Wow. Sold more phones than anybody that week. I never sold one before in my life, but I understood how to listen. I understood influence framework. So what happened is most of the reps that were there, when someone would walk through the door, they would start talking at them about the phone and the features and the benefits and the technology. And a lot of them were, they were, 23, 24-year-old, man. They loved the technology. I mean, tech was everything, and they loved all the bells and whistles. And I sold the first couple that walked through. They walked through the door. They had their granddaughter with them, and they were looking for a phone. And I ended up selling I think I sold them a Samsung S6 or something like that. And as they were looking through it, I just asked the guy, so y'all take a lot of pictures of your grandkids? And he said, yeah. And he smiled real big when I said it. I said, watch this. And I pointed the camera at his granddaughter. And I mean, she beamed, like she was smiling big. And I popped the camera up and I showed it to him. And he was like, wow, look at that picture. And I go, listen, and this is cool. You share your pictures with your friends? He goes, yeah. I said, you just click this button. It's on Facebook. I bought 2 phones. That was my entire sales conversation. So I mean, listening to him, his language was his grandkids, right? And it's not just at the consumer level; it's at the at the business level. It's the enterprise level. Mm-hmm. And in complex deals, you have multiple stakeholders. You got many people working in the deal. Each of those folks has a language, and they all make decisions in a nonlinear, emotional way, whether or not to advocate for you. So if you don't take time to listen to them, you'll never learn the language. And the problem for salespeople is salespeople don't listen because when they're not listening, when they're not talking, they don't feel important. And they're not able to manage or at least understand that emotion that they're feeling. I don't feel good. I don't feel accepted. And manage that and get out of the way of that. Now, at the same time, they also need to be able to understand that, buyers come in different shapes and sizes. They have different personas, and salespeople have to have enough empathy, by the way, to get out of the way of that and flex their style to the buyer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And 2 things came to mind when you were talking here. Is one is that a lot of times when salespeople are listening and they are asking questions, what they're really doing is they're thinking of what the next question is going to be while the person is talking. So they're missing all the key points and missing that language which is being said. So it makes it hard to relate to them.
And the reason that they're doing that is they're not in the conversation. So it's something called dual process questioning. So if you look at questioning methodology, and there's great ones. So you mentioned Deb Calvert. So she's got Discover Questions, one of my favorite books. I talk about Deb in Sales EQ. And spin selling is another one of those questioning methodologies. Or maybe your company has given you a list of questions that you need to ask, for qualifying or what have you. Mm-hmm. And salespeople have a tendency, they go through and they interrogate. They one question after another, versus having a conversation. And they're thinking about the next question that they're going to ask, or thinking about the next thing, or they're what I call pumping and pouncing, right? They ask 2 questions, the prospect says this, and then they pounce on it and start pitching.
Yeah.
what great salespeople, what the ultra high performers do is they take something like Discover Questions and they use it to build out their questions, but they build what I call go-to questions. These are my in my back pocket questions, the questions that I can ask in the context of the conversation. So this is empathy and outcome. This is dual process. At one point, I'm empathetic and I'm in the conversation with my prospect. At the same time, I'm strategic. I'm thinking 4 or 5 chess moves down the board. Where do I need to get to? What's my outcome? Now, I know what my outcome is because before I walked through the door, I'd already designed or targeted my next step. I knew what I was going to ask for. So that's pretty easy. But in the moment, I have confidence enough that if the person's talking, if I've got them telling their story, that I'm able to move the conversation anywhere I want to because the person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. And because prospects communicate in stories, you have to be a good listener. If you turn off, like you miss the emotional cues, like the point where they wince or they close their eyes or they look away or they lean forward or their tone changes or or they say something and they express it with their hands and body language. That's where I need to ask the next question. Well, if I'm so focused on the question I'm going to ask, I miss that. So as a salesperson, the key is you got to know your questions. I mean, if I'm a brand new salesperson, first thing I'm doing is I'm walking around everybody. What questions do you ask? What are your favorite questions? What happens? And then I'm going to shape those questions the way I say them. And I'm going to make them big and open-ended so I get people to talk. Because all I want the prospect to tell their story. Too many salespeople are asking a question to get a piece of information so that they can use that information to get something from the prospect. I want the prospect talking as much as possible. And I want them talking in stories because I know that, like the guy with the shirt, I know that, right? That if he's telling his story about what he doesn't like when he sees his guys come in and he's emotional about it, all I got to do is focus my time and attention on that and I'm going to win the deal. Yeah. And so if you're a salesperson and you're in that situation, I'm thinking about the next thing to say. Here's what I say. First of all, relax. Just relax. Have a conversation. Say things like, tell me more. How so? Help me understand. Walk me through that again. That seems like it was really emotional for you. Why was that? Get into that habit, that role, but never walk into a meeting with a prospect or a conversation if you don't know what you're asking for at the end. You have to understand what your target next step is so that your questions can get you towards that outcome. But as soon as you drop out of the conversation, as soon as you're thinking something else or being someplace else, I promise you lose. And your prospect knows it. They know that you're not emotionally engaged. They know that you don't care about them. And if you treat them that way, they don't like you. And if they don't like you, I can tell you they're not going to buy from you.
And is there such a thing as too many questions? Is there ever a time where you need to say, whoa, and just hit on the brakes? Because I'm reflecting on when I was new in sales. I felt like sometimes I would over question. I felt like I was interrogating. It didn't feel natural. And so I imagine a lot of people feel that way as well.
Yeah, there's a story I tell in the book about a CEO of a software company. It's one of my clients, and one of the things that he says is he says my goal in a sales conversation is to ask as few questions as I possibly can and extract the most information. Does it make sense? Yeah. So when you find yourself asking a lot of questions, it's interrogating. I mean, it's just like, if a stranger walked up to you and said, how many kids do you have? And where do you park your car? And what kind of car is it? And where do you live? I mean, you'd be like, oh my God, you want to run away. Same thing for salespeople. So this is what I mean by, people communicate in stories and questions control the flow. So when you walk through the door, what salespeople are doing is they're being lazy. What they're saying is, I want to ask as many possible questions as I can to get these little pieces of information that allow me to then go back and close the deal. When I walk through the door on the phone or physically in person, I'm asking questions that gets the person talking. I'm trying to trigger self-disclosure loop. I want to stay out of the way. I've had conversations, and I'm sure as you've grown in your career as well, I've had conversations where I've gone and asked one, maybe two questions and sat back and just let them at it. And I've gotten every piece of information that I need. And oh, by the way, this is a trick, new salespeople. As long as you're taking notes, and please, 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 don't take notes on a stupid iPad or on your phone. Use a pen and paper. Just trust me on this. Get a piece of paper and take notes. As long as you're taking notes, they'll keep talking. My goal is to reward them for talking, right? I want to reward them both by paying attention to them, making them feel important, right? And if a behavior gets rewarded, it has a tendency to continue. And through their own brain crack, their own self-disclosure loop, I want those kicking in so they're talking. I want them telling your story. And when they do that, and you have to trust this, but it works so well. Once they cross TMI zone, man, all bets are off. All you got to do is just sit back and relax, and they're going to tell you everything you need to do to close the deal. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And at that point, if your next step is the next meeting, if you have to do some more discovery, if you need more information, if you need to do whatever, all you do using their language, bridge to what you want, ask for it, and you'll get the next step. You're improving the probability that you get there. So if you step back and think about it, your goal is as few questions as possible, as much information as possible, allowing them to do most of the talking, where you can be tuned in, using empathy to be aware of their feelings and stepping in their shoes, looking at things from their perspective so that you can learn their language. And when you're presenting your solution, I call it bridging, but that's just my language, right? But when you're doing that, you're presenting based on what's important to them, not what's important to you. If you don't do that, all you're doing when you're presenting is pitching, and nobody buys a pitch.
Exactly. I like that. So if there's one thing you take away today from watching this, bring a pen, start writing it down, and I like that a lot. I'm going to start doing that. That's awesome.
Yes.
Very, very good advice. Jeb, I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for your time. Where can our followers, where can they get a copy of Sales EQ?
So I just got this copy in my hands. You're the first person to see it. Like, the greatest thing about writing a book is you come home from a trip and you walk through the door and your wife has got the very first copy of the book. So this book is available right now. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. So you can walk into your Barnes & Noble store and get it. If they don't have it, they'll order it for you. But most of the Barnes & Noble stores will have this. I'm sure by the time this gets produced, they'll have that. Amazon has it. Books A Million has it. If you're buying in bulk, 1-800-CEO-READ, you can buy more than one copy at the same time. You can go to my website, salesgravy.com /sales EQ, all lowercase, and you can take a look at the book there. You can get it anywhere that they have books, and go buy the book. I like it. If you don't like it, send me a note. I'll give you money back.
And I'm sure they will like it. You've released the first couple of chapters already as well online, and I've had a chance of looking into it. Fantastic stuff. I love it.
Thank you.
It's been a blast. I'm just got my pen, my highlighter, and in one of the notes actually I have it circled, and I love this. Like, this is just awesome.
Very good.
I studied psychology, so I love the topic of emotional intelligence and these little things of being able to help someone feel appreciated. So,
Yep.
Well, thanks, Jeb. I appreciate it again, and we're looking forward to learning more from you.
Sounds good.
All righty, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
So there you have it, my personal conversation with Jeb Blount. If you have a question for Jeb, me, or any of my mentors, be sure to send me an email to contact@helpmeclose.com. Also, you're going to want to subscribe, like, and share these videos. And as always, keep closing.